Okay guys, so in this video you and I are going to talk about improvements and doing things at an IT company. So let's get to it. So I got a request here where basically the question was, Frederick, I would love some examples of improving things for others and providing value. So that's pretty much what I'm going to go through with you. I'm going to talk you through just in general. I'm going to try to give you a few examples. Well, in this case, it's going to be two examples of a few scenarios where somebody has tried to improve something within an IT company. And then we're going to reflect a little bit about how that went, what the outcome was, and why it may have gone the way it went. So, we're going to focus on three main areas because in order for this to stay if in order for this to stay at a reasonable time, well, I'm gonna have to just cut it down to a few key topics. So we're going to look at the code first and foremost, improving things at the code level, and then we're going to have a look at improving things at a team level. In other words, you're affecting a team of people that work within a software delivery process, and then we're going to talk about the company level. How do you actually improve a company's overall performance and their delivery speed? So I will make an argument to you, and that is that all of these three things, they are actually tied together, because if you don't understand how to improve the code in a sustainable way, your team will actually suffer. Because if you create a lot of legacy code, or if you try to create improvements that actually turn out to be legacy at a later stage, the team itself will actually become unhappy and will actually perform worse. And the same thing goes all the way up to the company level. That's why there are three levels in my perspective on the whole topic of improving things. Because if the team is is not performing, or if they're unhappy, or even worse, if they're actually not committed to the work that they do, the company itself will actually suffer. So you need all these like these two bottom layers, the code and the team. They are critical in order to succeed at the company level. So it's a bit of a, I would say it's a spiral almost, where if all of these things are working great, you go up, and otherwise you're going to go down. So let's start with, first and foremost, code level initiatives, things that you might want to introduce into a code base that you believe is going to help the situation. So let's start with the problem. This is a real world problem that I was part of a while back. And the problem is there is an increasing level of regression bugs in the product, and the stakeholders are unhappy with how quality is dropping. So before we dive into the example solutions to this problem, let's consider a few key factors. So the first and foremost thing to know here is that the company in question had multiple teams. The company had multiple code bases. Each of the teams were working in an independent fashion, so you didn't have any guidance between the teams. They were all free to do whatever they wanted, basically. And the developers were in general unhappy with the situation, with how the code was looking and how there were so many regression bugs and so forth. But because there were some products that were shared and some products that were completely isolated, there was no real consistency between how to do work. And to add to that, the developers liked their workflow, and that was a big problem because they were unhappy with the fact that the code wasn't all that great, but at the same time they were very accustomed to being able to do whatever they wanted within their own area of the code base. And then finally, there was no company buy-in, because the company, as you might expect, didn't really have any thoughts on how to solve this, because this is quote unquote an engineering problem, which is, as I was saying earlier, a problem if you have that mindset, because if the code is shitty, the team is going to perform worse and the company is going to perform worse. So if even at the code level, it's still a company level problem. So to make a long story short, the first solution that was attempted was introduced by a junior developer who came in and had the idea that, all right, let's do pair programming as a default. And the basic idea was very simple. The idea was that we could increase quality of the software by using pair programming as a default to knowledge share and then review code while we were actually working. And by doing this, and by having more than one pair of eyes on any given problem, we could increase quality. Now, the way that went was that the general consensus was that people were unhappy with this. I think the whole thing fell through within less than 2 weeks. I think something like that. And the reason was very simple, because people just didn't want to spend 8 hours a day sitting next to each other and always talking about every single problem. And because that's the thing, right? Some problems were really big and might have been sort of interested in the beginning, but some problems were so trivial that people felt it was a waste of time to have more people sitting on that one problem. And the developer who was promoting this, he really tried. He really tried to use all of the things that the promoters of this are going to tell you, the evangelists and so forth. But then, the end of the day, we were still getting complaints. There were feelings of time waste, and there was, at the end, it fell through within less than 2 weeks, but in that time period there was no measurable difference in quality. And that is not necessarily a slam on this approach. It's just the outcome that we had in that company. And that doesn't mean that this is like pair programming is bad. It's just that the solution did not fit within the work environment we were dealing with. And I will tell you right now, to measure whether or not something has a sustained, like a long-term effect on the quality of something, it's vastly too little to try to evaluate that over 2 weeks. But the fundamental problem, at least from my perspective, was that the developer failed to understand how people work. And that is a big indicator to that your suggested improvement, which is the case with a lot of these process improvements that you want to add, which is one of the reasons why these, at least from my perspective, evangelists who go on stage on different tech talks and talk about work processes and patterns and strategies and so forth, they never ever get anyone to actually adopt these things in the way that they promote them to be adopted. Most people do their own thing, because at the end of the day, a work process isn't worth anything if it creates friction in the work environment and actually creates a negative effect. And that was the fundamental problem, at least from my perspective. The solution was not sustainable. It forced people out of their comfort zone, and it was, if we were to adopt this and just keep this around, every single team would have to have a culture around doing this exact thing, and at the end, and you still don't control whether or not you're going to get regression bugs, so the problem doesn't actually go away. So it was an attempt. And hopefully you can understand, at least from my perspective, what was wrong with this approach. Then we had solution number 2, which was a visual framework. So the idea behind the visual framework was that the developer in question who dealt with this problem had this idea that, well, most of the regressions and the inconsistencies and all the complaints that we have are related to the fact that we have all these teams who are creating their own way of doing things. In other words, when you are changing something in one place, the change should cascade to a few other places, but because we have multiple components, in this case it was at the visual layer, and in some cases in the back end as well, that change doesn't exist, and it becomes really hard when you have something where you think it's the same code doing all of these different things, right? But in actuality, it's 3 different versions of the same code who's doing this thing. In other words, we're not very dry about the whole thing. And so the developer had this idea that, all right, if we could just create a situation where we don't have to keep so much information in our heads, we don't have to think about creating new components at the visual layer to begin with. Well, if we do that, if we just standardize a few of these components and create them in such a way and decide within the team, that, all right, if we just all agree on that we will always use these components for everything, regardless of what the designers are giving us, whatever happens with the stakeholders, we just agree this is always the thing we use. Well, then what the effect is that we only have to test these components once, and it will cascade to the server because the visual components are tied into the server code as well. And now our solution will probably stay the same. We don't have to be worried that someone might make a mistake when they implemented it. And so the outcome was that there were some initial worries because the idea was very simple. Create visual components and then use a configuration system to express that we want to showcase this on a page. We want to use these components and so forth, but I don't actually write any code myself. I just create a configuration file, and then we have a very small boilerplate set of glue code, if you will, that wires up all of the components. Now, after I think just a few, it wasn't even a week, I think it was less than a few days, once the whole thing started coming together, we started seeing an improved delivery time and an overall improved level of quality. And after I think about 2 or 3 months of working with this visual framework and improving it and like iterating on it, we started getting kind of hilarious complaints about some developers felt that, oh well, the work has now become very boring because there's no need to do any code review. Basically, all you have to do is look at the configuration file that just specifies, oh, this is how the page, these are the components the page should use, and that's it. You just name the component, and then there's no way for you to actually mess it up because the component is already really well tested. There is no way that you could have changed something by mistake because you're basically just reusing code 100%. And the company gave this a lot of acknowledgement. The developers who came up with it were like commended for this initiative, and multiple other teams wanted their own version of this solution. And so it got a really a strong positive feedback because it actually solved the fundamental problem, and that was, as we were saying, the problem was that we had all these regression bugs, and there was no one who really understood why we couldn't keep ourselves from creating all of these bugs and all of these inconsistencies. And I believe that this solution worked because these developers, they understood why the inconsistencies were occurring. They understood the real problem. They weren't trying to they were trying to treat the problem at its source. They understood that the issue is that there is no standard. There's no standard way of doing things. People are just doing one-off solutions, and that's not going to be sustainable because in essence what you're doing, even though it's the quote-unquote same feature, you're just duplicating information, and it all comes down to, it becomes the same thing as having too many features that you can't just keep everything in your head. Now, the second thing I think that they did really, really well was that they provided a low effort approach. When this was introduced, there was no, they started in their own team. They just created a solution that worked extremely well for their team, and then they showcased it to the other teams, and they proved very clearly that we can now ship. I think that they cut down the delivery time. I know for a fact that this actually happened. The original delivery time on a standard feature related to the work they were doing was measured in between 1 to 2 weeks. They cut that down, at least the visual part. The backend still took a little bit of time before that came around as well. But originally the cut down was down to, I think it took a day or 2 tops. So it's like the return on investment on this was enormous. And they started small, and that's the key thing. So at least I believe that the main learnings from all of this is that everyone is different, and you should accept that. Any solutions that you have that doesn't acknowledge the fact that people are people and people will behave in different ways, if you don't account for the human factor, your solution is not going to work. And a solution where you force everybody to be somebody they're not, or force them to do things in a way that they don't feel comfortable with, is doomed to fail practically. And the second one is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I will argue to you that everybody has the best intentions. Everybody wants to solve problems, but and that's the thing. That's the problem with the first solution. If you asked me, at the very least, the assumption was that people will always have good intentions and will always feel motivated to do something, and that's just not true, because it's very easy to be enthusiastic about something that requires a fairly manual process when you start out with the thing. But on the other hand, it's really hard to maintain it. It's like going to the gym. It's easy to go there on day one. It's fucking hard to keep on doing that for 10 years. And the last one is, if it is easy to do, it will get done. And I really believe that. I really believe that there is a deep, profound truth here, which may seem a little bit silly to you, but to me, I think is quite profound. And that is that it really doesn't matter how clever your solution is or how perfect you think it is, because if people don't find it easy to adopt it into their work process, they're not going to. And the key factor that the second solution did embrace was that they designed a solution that was so low effort to implement, and they did it just for themselves, that other people were inspired to actually make their own version. So the whole thing started spreading. So the lesson to take away, at least from my perspective with this, is that good solutions are easy to adopt and sustainable. And this is not just true for the code level, but in general terms, at the code level, this is what you need in order to improve something in a sustainable way in a company. If you have an idea of rewriting a whole system or change an entire work process about something, it's very unlikely that you're going to get that through. These big bang things that just redoes everything in a new way, they very rarely get adopted, and they very rarely work. The thing that usually gets the job done is if you can identify the source of the problem and find a way to create a proof of concept or a solution that works at a small scale, and then build it up until it actually solves the entire problem, and then promote it. Explain to others why this is such a useful thing, and they will adopt it if it truly is something that is usable. So let's talk about team initiatives. Now we're going up a level. So now we've been at the lowest level and just looked at 2 examples. We can look at future examples about this as well, but I hope that you understand that there are so many examples that I could give you on different approaches and how to think about improving things. So let's just move on to the second level, which is the team level. This is also a very important level. So the problem that we're facing at the team level is the team is unhappy with miscommunication. People often express their frustration when things don't go as planned. Now this is also a very common problem, and I've faced this in more than one company. So in this specific scenario though, the key factors to consider are there are mixed personalities, so we have different people they all think differently, they behave differently. It's a fairly young team. There are fairly young people, and the team itself is kind of new. And there's quite a few inexperienced developers. There is a mix of developers. We had 1 or 2 really senior people, and then we had a lot of people who were just kind of on their first job. And then we have an inexperienced product owner who is supposed to act as sort of the team lead, or the person who is responsible for the team. And there's no leadership to be spoken of, really. The team just kind of gets requests, mostly ad hoc requests, into their process, and they just kind of adapt, and they need to of course go out and find stakeholders and all of this good stuff. And then finally, there's no process. The team pretty much just does whatever is assigned to them, and that's the whole story. So the first solution that was attempted to solve this problem, because the team was quite unhappy with this entire ordeal, because it became very unsustainable. A lot of people were doing double work without knowing it. There were quality issues and other miscommunications, and there was a general tension in the air. So what the management did was that they tried to create team building exercises. Now this is a fairly normal thing. If you have people who are unhappy with working with each other and there's a bunch of tension in the air, the first natural thing for a lot of people to think about is, all right, let's try to make friends. Let's try to create something that makes people get along, and let's see if we can get them to talk more to each other. So the management hired a few consultants that took in the team into I think it was a 2-day seminar or something like that, where they just talked. They talked a lot about who they are, and they had discussions about their past, and they talked about feelings, and they didn't sit in a drum circle, but I hope that you can understand. There was no trust falling either, but there was almost trust falling. So that sort of exercise is what they went through. Now the outcome of this was that the initial reaction was very positive. Like a lot of people were kind of thought that this was, wow, well, it seems interesting, it seems nice to change our daily routine a little bit. And the general consensus was that, all right, this improved the openness. People felt more comfortable with each other after have had this a little bit more in-depth discussions, and the general team spirit was also improved. However, the frustrations, they returned within the next week, and the enthusiasm, well, it wears off, and that's pretty much the thing that became the outcome. This was you can think of it as kind of a fireworks show. At least I like to think about it as a fireworks show. It sparkles for you are amazed for a split second, and then it's like nothing ever happened. And that's exactly how it went. It went from initial positivity and a lot of promises. I like to call them the New Year's Eve's resolutions. I'm sorry, I didn't express that really well, but that's what they are. Whenever you have any problem and people get to a boiling point, and then they try to fix it, and they do something that makes them feel better, because this is what it is. It's just stimuli. You're just introducing stimuli into the equation. People feel better for a few seconds, and then they go back to their old ways, because you haven't actually solved the problem. You have just made a bunch of false promises that doesn't last. And so what I argue, the reason why this didn't really work out is because talking only helps to solve short-term problems. You cannot talk away a problem that is much, much deeper, and actually it's a deeper problem than what you can talk away. And lasting change doesn't happen by only talking. Talking is great, and you need to communicate a lot, but without taking any concrete action that is sustainable, there will be no difference. So the second solution that was attempted was to add a minimalistic work process. Now the idea that this was actually by a developer, and this developer had the idea that, well, the idea was that the issue is that we have all of these people who work together, but they don't work as a team. They're just kind of taking in requests, and like no one really knows what the other people are doing, and that creates a bit of collision, because you don't communicate in an organic fashion if you only work as an island, even if you sit at the same desk. So perhaps by introducing a few small processes that will make it very clear to everybody what everybody is working on, and also a way of creating very organic touchstones every single day, where you have small pieces of information that needs to get traded between people, then these small little everyday conversations will start taking root. It's kind of like how it is with going to lunch with your coworkers or something. You just naturally start talking a little bit, and through these organic conversations about nothing, you get a higher level of comfort between the people who are interacting, and they actually start at some point sharing inevitably useful information about their own work process, how the things are going with their task, and so forth and so forth. So what the developer did was just to suggest a very simple thing. Okay, let's start working with a Kanban board, and let's create stories in a very standard agile fashion, and there was a few but without going too far with it. And let's just start there, and then let's just have a small sync up every morning where we just talk a little bit about how things are going, and let's just see how that goes. And the outcome was that this grew. It started out as this small little thing, and this introduction of a small process that just made sure that everybody was code reviewing each other's work, everybody was communicating when they were unsure about something, because if someone's working on something and somebody else is supposed to pick something else up, they need to talk in order to to not overlap in some fashion. These organic conversations actually took place, and then this grew, and all of a sudden people added in the idea, okay, we have these manual tasks or these things like taking care of bugs and doing this sort of stuff. Let's add a bit of task rotation. And the idea there was very simple. Like it's once a week, every person takes responsibility, or one person takes responsibility for making sure that if there are any critical tasks that needs to be taken care of, that person takes care of it. And so now knowledge sharing became a thing. And the overall team happiness increased, and what's even more inspiring was that the level of initiative and energy and hunger and sensation of ownership from the team went up as well, which I thought was really inspiring to see how it changed, because all that frustration and working by yourself and not actually being part of the team meant that people didn't really give, there was a bit of apathy going on. And when people started talking a little bit more and just felt that they had a sensation of what's going on, what's happening, what are we doing, and they had a sense of purpose and connection to what everybody else was doing, they started seeing a slightly bigger picture, and that actually helped them realize that, oh, there's so many things we're doing that could be even further improved. And so the whole thing started snowballing. And so I think that the main lesson there was that the teams, people thrive when they know what's going on. If you have a very chaotic process where people don't really know what's going on, that creates a lot of stress and tension, and a lot of people feel frustrated with that. There's a much likelier chance that people will feel comfortable if they know what's going on, and because they feel comfortable in certain patterns. And the thing is, people don't always know what will help, but they know what they don't like. And all of these developers, everybody in the team kind of knew that things weren't working, but they didn't really understand why nothing was working. So by just introducing a little bit of structure, the whole thing actually turned into something very positive. And I argue that the key thing that this developer got right here was that because there is such a thing as forcing people into too much process, but the genius part about this was just to identify that, all right, we just need to add the minimum amount of things so that this group of individuals start working as a team. And to do that, we just need a few key things, a tiny amount of process that makes these organic conversations happen. And all of a sudden the whole thing turned into a much more healthy environment. And that's all that's needed, at least if you ask me. All you ever want is to create a very healthy environment that reflects what you want, and then just let people grow inside of that environment. So the learnings that at least I got from this experience was that fix habits for long-term change. It doesn't help. I don't believe at all, at least me personally, I don't believe that you can solve the systematic problems by just talking. It's not going to happen. Fixing it, you can promise the New Year's Eve resolution thing again. You can promise yourself that you're going to get in shape every single year, and it's still not going to happen unless you change your habits. And I have a saying where I say incentive and physical limitation win every time. And the idea that I have there is that's what is required for something to work long term. Either you need an incentive system like money or something that people really want, or you need a physical limitation. You need something which stops people from doing something. Like, for example, if you put somebody in a room and there's an open door, even if they're supposed to stay in there, they might go out. If you want them to stay there, you're gonna have to add a door or something to keep them in the room. It's the same deal. If you want people to talk organically, or if you want to create a situation where people communicate more, you can't just tell them you should talk more. You have to create an environment where this actually happens, where there are limitations, even if they're just silly little limitations. If everybody just plays by those rules, the change will happen without you even noticing it. And that's the last thing. Create an environment and let it grow. I really believe that is one of the most important improvements when it comes to team level initiatives, where if you want a group of people to work better together, the important part is to create environment where they organically do so. If it's improving creativity or happiness or productivity, whatever you're doing, you need to figure out who are the players. Don't try to make them something they're not. Try to figure out how you can structure the process or the environment that they are dealing with, that they find themselves in, so that they just naturally do what it is that you want them to do. And adding like the minimum steps needed to improve communication in your daily job like this, it has a snowball effect, and I think that's really powerful. So the lesson here was helping a team is about fixing patterns, or fixing habits if you prefer. That's at least what I believe. That's what I took away from this experience. Lastly, we're going to talk about company level initiatives. So this problem is fairly substantial. So the development process is slowing down. Teams complain about the lack of quality focus, and the general happiness is dropping in the company. Trust in the system is dropping, and developers are scared to release new features. Tension and apathy is rising. Now, this is not a fun problem, and a lot of companies face this sort of problem. So, things to consider here is that the teams all work independently. So there's not like it's a company of some size. There are multiple teams. It's a distributed system where some parts are just owned by each team, and some parts are shared code where they kind of touch the same code. The CTO in this scenario was very supportive. The problem was that the CTO could not take ownership. There was no way for this person to actually to do much about this situation. And testing and quality checks and so forth is mostly a manual process. Now, so the first solution that this is higher level higher level management now. So what higher level management came with was that, all right, we're going to build engineering communities. And engineering communities is a simple idea. You have some area which you want to improve in, and you try to find some people that are interested in that area, and you create a forum where they can share ideas and talk about what can be done and how you can improve things. The ambition here was that if people just find a way to talk to each other about what they find interesting and hopefully that's going to translate into more enthusiasm about improving things within the company. Now, the outcome of this was that there was an initial enthusiasm when the idea was promoted. Like, we had a lot of people that were interested in taking part in front-end work or back-end work or infrastructure and stuff like that. So there were a few Slack channels in this scenario that were created, and people were talking, oh, we could do this or we could do that. But within just a few days, not days, say weeks at the very least, the enthusiasm started dropping when reality started setting in, and people realized that, well, we have all these ideas, but we don't really have time to do anything, and we still have to deliver on all the other stuff that we have going on. And there was a lot of negativity that came with the fact that there was a constant sensation of down prioritization. The few people that actually stuck by these communities and actually drove things and really wanted stuff to change, well, they could never get any time to do anything they wanted, because the management never thought that whatever they wanted was important. So there was a bit of a paradox going on. The spiral was going downwards, but nobody was really interested in attempting any of the initiatives that the developers were suggesting because of other restrictions. So the problems remained. Nothing actually changed. The only difference was that now there were Slack channels where nobody wrote anything, apart from maybe once or twice a month. And the thing that at least I saw, and I felt that I learned from this entire attempt, was that without clear priorities, nothing changes. And moving a company requires leadership, and that's the thing that was lacking here. If you tell a bunch of people that, oh, you should just get together and just talk and see if you come up with some cool ideas, and start suggesting those ideas, and then you never listen to them, or you never prioritize any of the work that they do, you're going to kill their enthusiasm. I actually did have a boss once who said to me, Frederick, you have all these great ideas. And I said, yeah, but we never do any of those ideas. And I said, yeah, but we can't do everything you want, but we still want the ideas. And I just looked at it and I thought, is he serious? how would he feel if you shot down every suggestion that he ever promoted? Like, how long does it take for someone, doesn't matter who it is, to get demotivated by the fact that nothing ever changes? And that's exactly the problem with this idea of building engineering communities had, at least if you ask me. Like, it was a nice idea, people coming together and just helping out, but at the end of the day, they are not in control of their own time. And unless somebody actually steps up and says, hey, you know what, we actually need to do this thing, and we actually put resources towards doing that, well, nobody's going to be able to do anything because all their time is tied up in other matters. So the second solution that was attempted was that a few developers decided, all right, we're going to create a roadmap and we're going to assign a task force. And the idea here was very simple. So the developers had this thought that, all right, we have all these issues and people are just in general expressing discomfort and unhappiness with the general situation, but we don't really have any concrete things people want to take action on. So let's start with that. So they created a poll where they went out into these engineering communities and just said, hey guys, we're trying to figure out like what sucks at this company, what really sucks at this company. And they started getting people just telling them that, oh well, this process sucks, we have no tests, and we don't have any definition of done, we don't know when we're done, and things is always breaking, etc., etc. And they just let the community vent all their frustration onto a list of things that they are unhappy with, pain points. And then they started asking, can maybe you vote a little bit about, if you, in a perfect world, what thing would you want to get solved first and foremost? And so the community gave some feedback and they started voting on, oh yeah, these issues are the most pressing ones. And then the task force took that back to their own team and they said, all right, we don't have the influence of the CTO and we can't decide what the company should be doing, but what we can do is control our own team. And we know that we have time enough to start looking into a few of these issues. The problem with some of them is that they will only work if we have other teams on board, because this is a distributed system. So if we fix something over here, it's not going to help people over there. But we can do things that are actually going to be beneficial to us here, just for ourselves. So they started. The first thing they did was to improve their own. They started improving their own workflow. They started looking at these problems and understood that the fear of regressions and the fear of having all of this lack of quality and so forth can be solved by simply adding automated testing and basically end-to-end testing and metrics, going hard on something that Google calls SLOs, or service level objectives. And what's very interesting is that they added that just to their own process and then iterated on it until it became a well-structured framework of work for them. And the outcome was very interesting, because when they started adding all of these the SLO metrics that they were gathering, and they actually put that up so that it made it a public thing, so that the other teams could see that if they are releasing something, they can see it immediately because there are alerts. And if the things that this team, like this task force, cares about, if something breaks, they will have alerts to notify the other teams that, oh, something isn't working the way it should be working. And on top of that, they had automated testing to create a sensation of security for themselves and for their team, because the other teams could trust that if something that this team cares about breaks, there will be a test for it, because they have tests that work at the feature level. And this success in this one team started spreading. So even though they didn't have any buy-in from the company, they couldn't change the whole company. They started in their own team, and then the other teams realized that, wow, this team has done the prep work. They've already set up everything in a way that will be applicable to other teams, because that's what the task force was there to do. Their ambition was to create a solution in their team that worked really well for them, but was applicable to multiple other teams. That way they could circumvent the whole problem of having to deal with all of these different teams aligning and synchronizing at the same time, which is in practice almost impossible unless you have leadership. Ideally, you have a CTO or some person like that who goes in and says, hey, this is priority, everybody needs to work together. But if you don't have that, you need to do the best of things. And when this happened, the trust in the system started increasing. People started feeling more secure about releasing new features. They started feeling happier just in general, because the sensation was that if something breaks, I will know about it. And that's just that improved their overall positive mental attitude towards their own system. And then they did what developers always do, and they started complaining about new things instead, because you can never make everybody happy. But I thought this was really cool, because it really showcased that, at least from my perspective, the thing that made the difference here wasn't the fact that you had everybody on board, or you had to have some CTO come in and say that, oh, we all need to prioritize this. It was possible to actually inspire positive change by simply addressing an issue that was common to all the teams, but at the same time was possible to work on by one single team. You didn't have to have the entire company involved at the same time. You just needed a dedicated group of people who had the capacity and ability to solve the problem, and then other teams could apply it. There was a lot of communication. The team did this, and I think the people who did this they did it in a great way. They were always asking for feedback and showcasing every step of the way. Oh, this is what we're doing. This is what we're thinking. How do you feel about that? Do you have something to say about this? So it was really transparent. And then people started adopting it. And what's even cooler was that after that, more people actually got on board with this idea that, well, maybe we actually should start thinking in task force that focus on solving a specific problem instead of just leaving it up to each team to deal with it. And that made the following initiatives even more powerful, because now you actually had the buy-in from the company, and they realized that, wow, maybe some problems can't be solved by just one team. Maybe you need to have a group of people from different teams to go together and say, hey, we are going to solve this thing, because in a distributed system there are many players, many different people need to be involved for big change to happen. And in some cases you need a representative from multiple teams that know different parts of the system to make the whole thing work. So the learnings from this, I will argue, is that you should listen to the thinkers and you should work with the doers, because the process of making something like this happen is that everybody has an opinion, everybody's unhappy, everybody knows how to complain, but there's not that many people who want to do something about it. And those are the people that you need. You don't need everybody to do their part. You need everybody to tell you what the problem is, and then you need to find a group of people who are interested in doing something about it, and then you grab these people and you take the lead. If you can do that while informing the others, because everybody wants to feel included, just tell them what you're doing so that they can give you feedback on it, but don't let them get in the way. You can get great things done. I really believe that a small dedicated group of people will move mountains, but a large collection of people full of both thinkers and doers will never get anything done. They will just sit and talk forever. So the second thing that was a good learning from this was that most of the work is getting the buy-in. Basically, that's the problem, because everybody knows how to complain, as I said, but getting people to actually allocate resources, that's a problem. Yeah, you can complain and you can acknowledge and you can sit and be a higher management type of person, but when it comes to actually investing in a solution and compromising other work that is important, very few people are willing to lay down the law and say, yeah, we're going to do this. Most managers will never go that far and stick their neck out in that fashion. And for you to get that to work, it's almost embarrassing that it requires the people who work at the bottom or of the ladder, which, well, in this case it's going to be the developers, that they have to get to work their asses off to convince people who have like so much more power. They could do it with a snap of their fingers if they wanted to, but they won't. That's the thing. They won't, because they will not act and they're not leading. They're basically that's the difference, in my opinion, between managing and leading. They are managing people. They're not leading. The third thing that was a great learning from this was to get one working thing in place before moving on. So we had like a lot of people had tried different initiatives, but they never really came to fruition. They never made a real impact on the work. And I think that this is the thing that these developers did that was so important. They proved that if you just give it the focus that it's due, a solution, and you focus on the right problem, the solution will actually, you can feel it in a gut level, at the gut level throughout the entire company. The entire company felt the impact of this initiative. It made a massive difference for one team, a booming success that then spread and became the envy of other teams, and other teams now wanted in on the action as well. And before they knew it, the company was actually saying that, well, you know what, this is our new direction now, we should move in this direction. And this is what all the IT companies want. It's just that for some reason it's very hard to find people in higher management who are willing to make these sorts of bets. The last thing that at least I learned from this experience was that gather allies but be ready to do the work. So throughout this process there were a lot of different people from different teams that were needed to be involved in order for this task force to figure out, okay, what do we actually need to do? Which systems do we need to touch? How can we structure all of this thing? And since they didn't own all of the code in every scenario, they needed to talk to people and just get people on board with the idea that, hey guys, I know that you guys are supposed to be in charge of this thing here and you know the most. Can we just talk to you for a few minutes and you tell us how to do this, and then we will do it ourselves? And most people were very willing to just lend their expertise and tell them, oh, you could do this or you could do that, and sure, we're okay with reviewing your pull request. They didn't want to help, but they weren't getting in the way. And the task force realized this, and they were okay with that. They didn't care that people were positive and like cheering them on but not willing to help. They just used all of the resources available to them and were ready to actually do the work themselves, as long as nobody got in their way. So the lesson here is that everything stands and falls with trust in the system. Because if you can't create a working solution where people feel like this system is safe to use, or that things are working, and people get unhappy, or they feel like there's a lot of manual processes and there's a lot of bugs and regressions and so forth, then the general mood of the company will just keep on dropping until you reach this sort of point where the people are getting demotivated. They don't like working in the company, and the only way to restore a company that gets to this point is to have people go in and look at, okay, where are the problem areas? In this scenario, it was testing and quality that was the issue. So they assigned a group of people who were dedicated to solving that problem. And by doing so, this team identified that, all right, we really only need to address the issue of, okay, regressions, we need to add automated testing. Okay, we don't know if all of our systems are working in production. Okay, we should add some metrics that actually showcase if the system is healthy, and actually go heavy on that so that we can know if one team breaks something for another team. And that's the thing. If things break all the time, people get demotivated, and without a way to track when your features are working as intended, you are kind of flying blind. And so by solving these issues in this scenario, trust in the system was increased, and developers felt at ease again. They felt like, okay, maybe this isn't such a shitty project, and maybe it's okay to release more often, because now at least I know if I broke something. So what I want you to take away from this is that in these three scenarios, the lessons that at least I took away was that if you're going to create an initiative and try to improve something at the code level, you need to consider this. A good solution is easy to adopt and sustainable, because if you have a solution that will only work for you or for your team or a part of your team, then it's not going to scale, and you're going to end up with some people using the solution and some people not. You need to find a way to make other people feel, ideally everybody, that this thing is actually an improvement on our work process, regardless of what that work process looks like. At the team level, you need to think, if you want to improve things there, you need to think about this, and I think that this is true for more than just software teams. Helping a team is about fixing patterns. If you want people to be happy, you can't just talk to them and say, oh yeah, we promise that we will communicate more, or we promise that we will do more code reviews, or we promise this or that. You need to introduce something that that moves people in the right direction, and that's usually by fixing patterns. It's very similar to if you want to get in shape and you can't build up the strength of will to do it yourself and go to the gym by yourself, then you might need to get a friend who is responsible for helping you get there. In some extreme cases, you might say that, oh, if we're gonna go to the gym and I bail on you, I will owe you. You will sign a contract. I will owe you some money because I am committed, but I'm a lazy person, and sometimes I need that extra incentive. At the company level, I think that the most important thing to know is that everything stands and falls with trust in the system. So if you want to improve an entire company of people and you want to make that company a happier place and a more productive place of work, you need to address the issues that are related to trust. If you have people in sales or you have people in engineering or whatever who feel like this is a shit system, and usually the reason why people feel that something is a shit system is because there's no trust in the system. Things are breaking, there are bugs everywhere, and there are inconsistencies and so forth. These issues needs to be addressed, and the best way to do that, to fix that at a company level, is to assign task force or people dedicated to solving this problem, and then visualize the problem. Create a way for people to get a very good overview of what's going on. If people feel like, oh, we have metrics and dashboards that very clearly show that everything is working, and we have a bunch of automated tests that verify that all the features are working as intended, and we know that if we're releasing something, we will know if something breaks. If you can create that level of trust and security within the company will flourish. Like, people will be happier in general. Hopefully you found all of this information useful. Have a great day.